The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clanged against the concrete floor of my auto shop. It was past midnight, and I was alone under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's ancient Honda, trying to forget that my wife hadn't come home again. That's when my phone buzzed with a text meant for someone else entirely. Last night was unforgettable. My place again tomorrow? B. The message was addressed to my wife Elizabeth's number, but it had somehow bounced to mine through our shared Apple account. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering like a diesel engine with bad timing. Either my wife had developed a secret twin, or my 15-year marriage had just run over a spike strip at full speed. I'm Nathan Cross, 38 years old, owner of Cross Auto Repair in the fated mill town of Millbrook, Massachusetts. Ex-Army mechanic turned small business owner. The kind of guy who fixes things for a living because breaking them comes so naturally to everyone else. I met Elizabeth when she was fresh out of law school, working as a public defender with stars in her eyes and idealism in her heart. Back then, she thought my calloused hands and blue-collar honesty were charming. Now, 15 years later, she was a hotshot corporate lawyer who looked at those same hands like they were covered in something worse than motor oil. The phone buzzed again. Another message to Elizabeth's number, this time with a photo attachment I definitely didn't want to see, but couldn't stop myself from opening. It was a hotel room keycard next to a bottle of expensive champagne. The kind of champagne that cost more than most people in Millbrook made in a week. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. My hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold November air seeping through the garage door. In the space of 2 text messages, my world had shifted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my future, all of it was suddenly as reliable as a transmission held together with duct tape and prayer. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how much sense it suddenly made. Elizabeth's late nights at the office, her new wardrobe of designer suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, the way she'd started looking at me like I was a stain on her perfect reputation, the separate bedrooms we'd maintained for the past 6 months, allegedly because of my snoring. I walked to the mini-fridge in the corner of the shop and grabbed a beer, twisting off the cap with more force than necessary. The bitter liquid did nothing to wash away the taste of humiliation rising in my throat. 20 years ago, I was Staff Sergeant Nathan Cross, responsible for keeping million-dollar military vehicles running in the middle of nowhere Afghanistan. Now I was just the grease monkey husband who wasn't sophisticated enough for his lawyer wife's new life. But I wasn't just going to roll over and take it. Not this time. I spent the next hour going through Elizabeth's phone records on our shared account. What I found painted a picture that made my stomach churn. Hundreds of texts to a number I didn't recognize, all sent during business hours when she claimed to be in meetings. Hotel charges on our joint credit card that she'd somehow managed to hide from me. A pattern of deception so elaborate it must have taken months to orchestrate. The number belonged to Bradford Hayes, senior partner at Elizabeth's law firm. I'd met him exactly once, at the firm's Christmas party last year. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. He'd looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather shoes, making small talk about blue-collar authenticity, while his eyes screamed that he thought I was beneath his notice. Apparently, I'd been wrong about being beneath his notice. He'd noticed my wife just fine. I locked up the shop and drove home through empty streets, my mind racing faster than my pickup truck's aging engine. Our house sat on Maple Street, a modest 2-story colonial that Elizabeth had once called charming, and now probably saw as an embarrassment. I'd spent 5 years renovating it myself, learning plumbing and electrical work through YouTube videos and sheer determination. Every room held memories of us working together, planning our future, talking about the kids we'd have someday, the kids that never came. Another failure Elizabeth had learned to hold against me. I parked in the driveway and sat in the dark for a long moment, staring at the house that no longer felt like home. Elizabeth's BMW was nowhere to be seen, which meant she was probably at Bradford's place, doing things I didn't want to imagine. The thought made my hands clench into fists. Inside, the house felt hollow and cold. Elizabeth had been slowly removing traces of us from the walls, replacing our wedding photos and vacation pictures with abstract art that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Even our home was being transformed to match her new image. I went to her office, a converted bedroom where she kept her files and laptop. The desk was locked, but I'd installed the hardware myself and knew where she kept the spare key. Inside, I found printed emails, hotel receipts, and a burner phone I'd never seen before. The emails were explicit enough to make me nauseous. Bradford wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was planning to leave his own wife for her. They'd been discussing Elizabeth's divorce strategy, how to minimize what I'd get in the settlement, how to paint me as an unstable veteran with anger issues. They'd been planning my destruction with the same cold efficiency Elizabeth brought to her corporate cases. The burner phone contained photos that confirmed my worst fears, and several I hadn't even considered. This wasn't a recent affair born of midlife crisis or temporary insanity. This had been going on for over a year. They'd been laughing at me, pitying me, planning around me like I was a minor obstacle to be managed and discarded. I sat in Elizabeth's chair, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and shock were crystallizing into something harder and colder, something that felt almost like relief. For months, I'd been trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a husband. Turns out, my only failure was trusting someone who'd been playing a completely different game all along. I photographed everything with my own phone, then carefully returned the items to their original positions. Elizabeth thought she was so much smarter than me, the sophisticated lawyer married to the simple mechanic. She was about to learn that underestimating someone is the first step toward losing to them. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee, settling in at the table to plan my next move. Outside, the first hints of dawn were creeping across the sky, and I could hear the distant rumble of early commuters heading to jobs that still mattered to them. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "No problem. Take all the time you need." She had no idea how much time she was going to need. Elizabeth came home at 7:30 the next morning, slipping through the front door like she was sneaking into her parents' house after curfew. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and the morning paper, playing the role of the oblivious husband one last time. "You're up early," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but I could smell unfamiliar cologne on her clothes. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, turning a page of the sports section. "How was the case preparation?" "Exhausting." She moved toward the coffee pot with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield. "We're dealing with a very complex merger. Lots of late nights ahead. I'm sure Bradford appreciates your dedication." She froze for just a moment, her hand hovering over the coffee pot handle. "How do you know Bradford's involved?" "You mentioned him before. Senior partner, right? Seems like the kind of guy who'd demand perfection from his team." Elizabeth relaxed slightly, pouring her coffee into the travel mug I'd given her for our anniversary 3 years ago, back when she still pretended our marriage mattered to her. "He's very demanding," she said, "but working with him is a great opportunity for my career." "I bet it is." She kissed my forehead before leaving, a gesture so casual and practiced it might have fooled me if I didn't know better. The kiss felt like a slap, and after she left, I drove to my shop and tried to focus on work. But every customer who walked through the door seemed to know something I was supposed to be hiding. Millbrook was the kind of town where secrets had the half-life of a mayfly, and I could see the speculation in people's eyes. My best friend Jules Martinez showed up around noon, ostensibly to check on his truck's oil change, but really to fish for gossip. Jules owned Murphy's Bar, the kind of place where half the town's business got conducted over beer and whiskey. If anyone knew what people were saying about my marriage, it would be him. "You look like hell," he said, settling onto a stool in my office. "Everything okay at home?" Jules was one of the few people in town who'd known me since before Elizabeth, back when I was just another veteran trying to figure out civilian life. He'd been my best man, and Elizabeth had been trying to freeze him out of our social circle for years. "Define okay," I said. "That bad, huh?" I considered telling him everything, laying out the whole sordid story and asking for advice. But Jules had his own problems, a messy divorce, 2 kids he barely got to see, and a business that survived on razor-thin margins. He didn't need my drama added to his pile. "Elizabeth's been working a lot," I said instead. "We're just going through a rough patch." Jules studied my face with the expression of a man who'd heard that particular lie before. "You know, if you ever need to talk, I know. Thanks." He left without pushing, which I appreciated, but I could see the concern in his eyes, and I knew he'd be watching for signs that I was falling apart. In a town like Millbrook, your friends' failures became your own by association. The rest of the week passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Elizabeth maintained her schedule of late nights and early mornings, always with plausible explanations and just enough detail to sound convincing. I played the supportive husband, asking about her cases and pretending to believe her lies, but I was also gathering intelligence. I tracked her movements through our shared location services, confirming that her late nights at the office were actually spent at Bradford's downtown condo. I monitored our credit card statements, watching the charges pile up at expensive restaurants and hotels. I even drove by Bradford's building a few times, noting the security cameras and the parking situation. The hardest part was maintaining the facade around other people. Elizabeth's mother Diane called twice that week, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension she'd perfected over 15 years of making it clear I wasn't good enough for her daughter. "Nathan, dear, how's business?" she asked during the second call. The word business pronounced like it was something distasteful she'd found on her shoe. "Can't complain, Diane. People keep breaking their cars. I keep fixing them." "How wonderfully stable." "And Elizabeth, I suppose she's terribly busy with important cases." Diane had never worked a day in her life, having married into old money and spent 40 years perfecting the art of looking down on people who actually earned their living. She'd been pushing Elizabeth toward divorce for years, not so subtly suggesting that a successful lawyer deserved better than a mechanic. "She's working very closely with the senior partners," I said. "Very hands-on collaboration." "Oh, how marvelous! Bradford Hayes is such a distinguished man. Elizabeth is so fortunate to have his mentorship." The way she said Bradford's name told me everything I needed to know. Diane wasn't just aware of the affair, she was actively encouraging it. Elizabeth hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd turned it into a family project. "Yeah," I said. "He's really taking her under his wing." "Well, I'm sure she appreciates having someone who truly understands her potential." The conversation ended with Diane's usual passive-aggressive reminders about Elizabeth's superiority and my inadequacy. But this time, instead of making me angry, it just added another name to my list. Friday night, Elizabeth announced she'd be working through the weekend. "Big presentation on Monday," she explained, not bothering to make eye contact as she packed an overnight bag. "I'll probably just stay at the office. Need me to bring you dinner or anything?" "No, Bradford's having food catered for the team." She left with a casual wave, like she was heading to the grocery store instead of a weekend-long affair with her boss. I watched her BMW disappear down Maple Street and felt the last vestiges of my old life crumble away. But I wasn't planning to mourn it. I was planning to burn it down. I spent Saturday conducting reconnaissance. Bradford's condo was in Harbor Towers, a glass and steel monument to expensive taste in downtown Boston. The building had valet parking, a doorman, and the kind of security that was designed to keep out people like me. But security systems were just machines, and I'd spent 20 years working with machines. They all had weaknesses if you knew where to look. I parked across the street and watched the building's rhythm. The valet staff changed shifts at 6. The doorman took smoke breaks every hour, stepping just outside the entrance. The parking garage had a separate entrance with a card reader that looked about 5 years old. The kind of system that could be fooled with a little creativity and the right equipment. Elizabeth's BMW was parked on the 3rd level, next to Bradford's silver Porsche. Seeing them together, those two expensive cars side by side, felt like looking at a photograph of my wife in bed with another man. I didn't do anything that day. I just watched and learned and planned. But as I drove home through the empty streets of downtown Boston, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Elizabeth thought she was so much smarter than me, playing chess while I was stuck playing checkers. What she didn't realize was that I'd stopped playing her game entirely. I was playing a different game now, one with different rules and a very different definition of winning. Sunday morning, I drove to Home Depot and bought supplies. Nothing dramatic or illegal, just basic hardware and automotive fluids that any mechanic might need. But I selected each item with the care of a surgeon choosing instruments, thinking through applications and consequences. The young clerk who rang up my purchase was Tommy Brennan, whose family had been coming to my shop for years. He looked at my cart with the curiosity of someone trying to figure out what project I was working on. "Big job coming up, Mr. Cross." "Oh, you could say that," I replied. "Sometimes you have to tear something down before you can build it back up right." "Yeah, I hear that. My dad always says the hardest part of any renovation is knowing when to stop trying to save what's already broken." Smart kid. His father had raised him right. I drove home and stored my purchases in the garage, organizing everything with military precision. Elizabeth would be home soon, probably with some story about how exhausting her weekend of work had been. I'd listen and nod and play the supportive husband one more time. But my patience was running out, and so was her time. Elizabeth returned Sunday evening with the satisfied glow of a woman who'd spent the weekend being thoroughly appreciated. She moved through our house like a guest in a hotel, touching nothing, claiming no space, maintaining the careful distance she'd been cultivating for months. "How was your weekend?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me with a glass of wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "Quiet," I said. "Caught up on some projects. You look refreshed. Working with Bradford is energizing. He has such a clear vision for the firm's future and your place in it." She smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. Ambitious, confident, alive with possibility. Let's just say there might be some big changes coming. Changes? In my career, my life, everything, really. She was testing me, I realized, seeing how much she could hint at without triggering suspicion. It was probably a game to her, this careful dance around the truth. Another way to feel superior to the husband who was too stupid to see what was happening right in front of him. "Well," I said, "change can be good. Sometimes you have to break a few things to build something better." "Exactly." She raised her wine glass in a mock toast. "To breaking things." "To breaking things," I agreed, lifting my beer. If she'd been paying attention, she might have noticed that I was smiling. Monday morning brought the first crack in Elizabeth's perfect facade. She was getting dressed for work when her phone rang, and I heard her side of a conversation that made her voice tight with stress. "What do you mean, postponed? We've been planning this for weeks." "No, I understand, but fine. Yes, I'll handle the clients." She hung up and stood staring at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, her jaw clenched in frustration. "Problems at work?" I asked. "Bradford had to fly to Chicago unexpectedly. Some crisis with a client. It's just, we had important meetings scheduled. I'm sure he'll make it up to you." She shot me a sharp look, like she was trying to decide if there was a hidden meaning in my words. But I kept my expression neutral, and after a moment she relaxed. "It's just frustrating when other people's emergencies become your problems. Tell me about it. Half my job is fixing what other people broke." She left for work still agitated, and I spent the morning making phone calls, not to customers or suppliers, but to a private investigator I'd found online. Someone discreet and professional, with experience in matrimonial cases. "I need documentation," I told him. "Photos, records, anything that would hold up in court." "How much documentation are we talking about?" "Everything. I want to know what she had for breakfast and who paid for it." "That's going to be expensive." "I don't care what it costs." It was true. Money had never mattered less to me than it did right now. Elizabeth could have Bradford's expensive tastes and luxury lifestyle. I just wanted the truth, documented and undeniable. The investigator promised results within a week, and I spent the rest of Monday planning phase 2 of my campaign. If Elizabeth wanted to play games, I'd give her a game she'd never forget. Tuesday evening, she came home excited about something. She was practically glowing as she poured herself wine and settled into her chair, with the air of someone about to share wonderful news. "I have something to tell you," she said. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "What's that?" "Bradford's recommended me for senior associate. It would mean a huge salary increase, my own office, real responsibility." "That's great, Elizabeth. You've worked hard for this." "There's just one thing." She paused, swirling her wine like she was gathering courage. "The position would require a lot of travel, late nights, weekend work. It might be challenging for our marriage." No, there it was, the setup. She was laying the groundwork for our divorce, making it seem like career demands rather than adultery were driving us apart. Probably Bradford's idea. It would look better in court if she could claim our marriage failed due to professional obligations rather than personal betrayal. "We'll figure it out," I said. "We always do." "Do we, though?" She leaned forward, her expression earnest and concerned. "Nathan, be honest. Are you happy? Really happy?" It was a masterful performance. She looked like a woman wrestling with difficult emotions, trying to save a marriage that was slipping away despite her best efforts. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been fooled. "I'm happy when you're happy," I said. "That's not what I asked." "Then no, I'm not happy. Are you?" "I don't know anymore." She set down her wine glass and looked at me with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "I feel like we've grown into different people, like we want different things." "What do you want, Elizabeth?" "I want to matter. I want to build something important, something that lasts. I want to be with someone who understands that ambition isn't a character flaw. And you don't think I understand that? I think you're a good man, Nathan. But I don't think we're good together anymore. It was beautifully done. She was positioning herself as the mature, thoughtful spouse who'd recognize that sometimes love isn't enough. She was giving me an opportunity to be equally mature, to agree that we'd simply grown apart and should end things amicably. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. I love you, I said. Whatever problems we have, we can work through them. Marriage is about commitment, right? For better or worse. She pulled her hand away, and for just a moment I saw a flash of irritation cross her face. I wasn't following the script she'd written. Some things can't be fixed, Nathan. I don't believe that. I fix things for a living, remember? Cars aren't marriages. No, but the principle's the same. You diagnose the problem. You replace the broken parts. You do whatever it takes to make it work again. She stood up abruptly, her composure cracking. What if the whole system is broken? What if it's beyond repair? Then you rebuild it from scratch. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her recalculating. This conversation wasn't going the way she'd planned, and she was trying to figure out her next move. I need some air, she said finally. I'm going for a drive. She grabbed her keys and left, and I knew exactly where she was going. Straight to Bradford's condo, to tell him that her husband wasn't going to make this easy. Good. I didn't want to make anything easy for them. Wednesday brought the private investigator's first report, delivered via encrypted email with photos that made my stomach turn. Elizabeth and Bradford at dinner, holding hands across a table at a restaurant that probably charged $50 for an appetizer. Elizabeth and Bradford entering his building together, her hand on his arm like they were a real couple. Elizabeth and Bradford kissing in the parking garage, her body pressed against his like she couldn't get close enough. But the most damaging photo was one I hadn't expected. Elizabeth and Bradford with another couple at what looked like a work function, all four of them laughing at some shared joke. The other couple was clearly Bradford's friends, and Elizabeth was being introduced as his girlfriend. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was living a completely separate life where I didn't exist. I printed the photos and studied them like intelligence reports, looking for details that might be useful later. Elizabeth had bought new clothes for these occasions, outfits I'd never seen. She'd changed her hairstyle, started wearing different makeup. She'd literally transformed herself into someone else. The investigator's report included financial records that painted an even clearer picture. Bradford had been paying for everything: dinners, hotels, even some of Elizabeth's new clothes. He'd bought her jewelry I'd never seen, taken her on weekend trips I'd known nothing about. For the past 6 months, he'd essentially been supporting my wife like a kept woman. Thursday evening, Elizabeth announced that she'd be attending a firm dinner on Saturday night. Big client event, she explained. All the senior staff will be there. Sounds important. It is. Bradford thinks it's crucial that I make a good impression. I'm sure you will. Actually, she said, as if the thought had just occurred to her, you should come with me. I looked up from my dinner, genuinely surprised. Really? Why not? It's time you met more of my colleagues, and Bradford's been asking about you. I'll bet he has, I thought, probably wondering what kind of threat the husband posed to his plans. I'd like that, I said. It's been too long since we went out together. Great. It's at Meridian downtown, Saturday at 7. Meridian was the kind of restaurant where entrees started at $40, and the wine list read like a real estate catalog. The kind of place where people like Bradford felt comfortable, and people like me were supposed to feel intimidated. Should I wear my good suit? Definitely. First impressions matter. Friday passed in a haze of anticipation. Elizabeth seemed nervous about something, making and canceling plans, checking her phone constantly. She was probably coordinating with Bradford, making sure they had their stories straight for tomorrow night. Saturday afternoon, I drove to Boston and spent an hour walking around Meridian's neighborhood, familiarizing myself with the layout. The restaurant was on the ground floor of a historic building, with large windows facing the street and valet parking in front. Lots of visibility, lots of witnesses. Perfect. I went home and put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to our wedding 15 years ago. It still fit, though it felt strange after months of work clothes and casual wear. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man getting ready for the most important performance of his life. Elizabeth emerged from her bedroom wearing a black dress I'd never seen before. Something elegant and expensive that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. She looked beautiful, sophisticated, like she belonged in Bradford's world. You look amazing, I said. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. We drove to the restaurant in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Elizabeth kept checking her reflection in the passenger mirror, adjusting her hair and makeup with the nervous energy of someone preparing for battle. Meridian was exactly what I'd expected, all dark wood and soft lighting, with the kind of hushed atmosphere that made you feel like you should whisper. The hostess led us to a private dining room where about 20 people were already gathered, drinks in hand, engaged in the kind of animated conversation that meant serious money was being discussed. Bradford spotted us immediately and approached with the confident stride of a man on his home turf. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and his smile had the practiced warmth of someone who made his living convincing people to trust him. "Nathan," he said, extending his hand. "So good to finally meet you properly. Elizabeth talks about you constantly." His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, his eye contact direct, but not challenging. He was playing the role of the respectful colleague, the family friend who had nothing but admiration for Elizabeth's devoted husband. "All good things, I hope," I replied. "Nothing but. She's very proud of the business you've built. It's not much, but it pays the bills. Don't be modest. Small business ownership is the backbone of America. I have tremendous respect for entrepreneurs." He was good. I had to give him that. The perfect combination of friendly and condescending, making it clear that he considered me harmless, while maintaining plausible deniability about his real feelings. Elizabeth stood between us, like a woman caught between two worlds, her smile bright but brittle. "Bradford, you should tell Nathan about the Morrison case. I think he'd find it fascinating." "Oh, I doubt Nathan wants to hear about boring legal work." "Actually, I'm very interested in Elizabeth's career," I said. "She's been working so hard lately, all those late nights and weekend sessions." "She's incredibly dedicated," Bradford agreed. "One of our most valuable associates." "I'm sure she is. Elizabeth's always been good at collaborative work." Something flickered in Bradford's eyes, just for a moment. He was wondering if there was a double meaning in my words, trying to decide if I was as oblivious as he'd assumed. "Well," he said, "teamwork is essential in our business." "I imagine it is. Elizabeth tells me you two work very closely together." "We do, very intimately familiar with each other's methods." Now he was testing me, seeing how much innuendo I'd tolerate before reacting. Elizabeth was watching both of us, with the expression of someone watching a tennis match, her head turning back and forth as we lobbed seemingly innocent comments at each other. "That's wonderful," I said. "There's nothing more important than trust between partners." "Absolutely. When you find the right partner, someone who really understands your needs, it changes everything." I couldn't agree more. We smiled at each other like old friends sharing a private joke, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out what I knew and how much of a problem I might become. Dinner was an exercise in elaborate theater. I sat next to Elizabeth, playing the supportive husband, while Bradford held court from the head of the table. The conversation flowed around topics I was clearly expected not to understand: mergers and acquisitions, regulatory compliance, billable hours, and partnership tracks. But I listened carefully, filing away names and details that might be useful later. Bradford's world was smaller than it appeared, built on relationships and reputation, and the kind of professional gossip that could destroy careers if it reached the wrong ears. After dinner, Bradford stood to make a toast. "To the future of Hayes and Associates," he said, raising his glass, "and to the exceptional people who make our success possible." Everyone drank, and I noticed that Bradford's eyes lingered on Elizabeth just a moment too long. She blushed and looked down at her hands, playing the role of the modest employee who was secretly pleased by her boss's attention. "Elizabeth," Bradford continued, "has been particularly instrumental in our recent growth. Her dedication and personal commitment to excellence have been truly inspiring." More applause, more meaningful looks. They were practically flirting in front of a room full of people, confident that no one would see anything inappropriate in a boss praising a valued employee. But I saw it, and I was pretty sure at least a few other people in the room saw it too. As the evening wound down, Bradford approached our table one more time. "Nathan, I hope you'll forgive me for stealing your wife so much lately. This Morrison case has been all-consuming." "No problem at all. I know how important Elizabeth's career is to her. She's lucky to have such an understanding husband." "I'm the lucky one. Elizabeth's always been out of my league." Bradford smiled. and I could see him thinking exactly the same thing. Well, I should let you two get home. Elizabeth, I'll see you Monday morning. We have that early meeting with the Morrison team. Of course, I'll be there. They shook hands, and I noticed that Bradford's fingers lingered on Elizabeth's just a moment longer than necessary. She noticed too, and her cheeks flushed pink. We drove home in silence, both of us processing the evening's events. Elizabeth seemed pleased with how things had gone, probably thinking she'd successfully introduced her husband to her lover without arousing suspicion. She had no idea that the evening had gone exactly as I'd planned. Bradford seems like a good man, I said as we pulled into our driveway. He is. Very professional, very smart. Attractive, too. I bet he's popular with the female staff. Elizabeth shot me a quick look. I wouldn't know about that. Come on, you must have noticed. A guy like that, successful, unmarried. He's not unmarried. He's separated, but still technically married. Ah, well, I'm sure his wife is very understanding about his work relationships. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that divorce can be complicated when you're dealing with someone in a position of power. We went inside and got ready for bed in our separate rooms, maintaining the careful distance that had become our normal routine. But as I lay in the dark, I could hear Elizabeth on the phone in her room. Her voice too low for me to make out words, but urgent enough to confirm my suspicions. She was reporting back to Bradford, probably reassuring him that her husband suspected nothing. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't stay wrong for much longer. Sunday morning, Elizabeth announced that she needed to go into the office to prepare for the Morrison meeting. Just for a few hours, she said. I should be back by dinner. No problem. I've got some projects to work on anyway. She left around 10, and I gave her 30 minutes before following. Her BMW was parked outside Bradford's building, right where I'd expected it to be. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. I spent the afternoon making final preparations, checking and double-checking every detail of what was about to happen. By the time Elizabeth came home that evening, I was ready. How was work? I asked. Productive. Bradford's very hands-on with important cases. We had dinner and watched television, playing our roles one last time. Elizabeth seemed relaxed, probably thinking she'd successfully navigated the dangerous waters of introducing her husband to her lover. She had no idea that she'd just lit the fuse on a bomb that was about to destroy everything she'd worked to build. Monday morning, she left for her early meeting with Bradford, kissing my forehead in that casual, dismissive way that had become her signature gesture of marital contempt. Have a good day, she said. Oh, I will, I replied. I definitely will. She was halfway to her car before she realized what I'd said, but by then it was too late to ask for clarification. I watched her drive away and started counting down the hours until her world exploded. It was time for Phase 3.